Good evening, everybody. We're in a new fiscal cycle, 2021. I don't think anybody is unhappy to let 2020 go and look forward to the fiscal year of 2021. There is a lot to say. The parasha, the portion Vayechi, means "and he lived." And there's a very interesting piece of writing by the Lubavitcher Rebbe where he says, "And he lived" is rather an inappropriate name because the parsha is basically talking about Yaakov's passing. And then he goes into the conversation of what is life. The Torah teaches us, you who are connected to God, your God, are all alive today. Of course, a Jew is inherently connected to God, but in order for that connection to be visible and apparent in the world, God sends trials and tribulations and challenges in his divine service. When these hurdles are overcome, we then have proof that the connection between the Jew and Hashem is an unbreakable one. Thus, we are only aware that a person has really lived or is really alive when he's about to pass away. For only then it is evident that all the trials and all the tribulations of life were intended to highlight and express the powerful bond of a Jew to Torah and mitzvahs. So only when reaching Parshas Vayechi do we finally witness that Jacob indeed lived. The Talmud states, just as his descendants are alive, he too is alive. For the true commitment a person to Judaism is only ultimately discernible when we see his children and his grandchildren steadfast in their observance of Torah and mitzvah. So, what if you don't have children or grandchildren? What if you're alone? Does that mean you're not and you are not alive? Something to think about. There are many, many places in the Zohar where, for instance, the conversation is very, very straightforward about men who leave this world without having left an heir. Not women, only men. And those men are considered to be as though they have not been born, and it would have been better for them to have not been born. One day we'll take this subject and we'll really go into it. I don't think this is the moment to do it. We have a lot to do, but I think it's an important thing, just like one of the things that will come up now in Yaakov's realizing that he's going to die. And there are many ways in which Hashem gives us notice that death is imminent, and one of them is, this also comes of course from Zohar, that you lose your shadow 30 days before you actually are going to die. So 30 days before your shadow is taken away, that shadow is taken to another place to show him other things. But Yaakov knew that he was going to die, and when he realized, obviously, that he's going to die, he's going to make sure that he is not going to remain in Egypt, and he's going to make Yosef swear that he is going to take him and he's going to bring him to the cave of the Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and Rivka and Leah, Yaakov's wife, are buried. And of course, he makes him swear on the holiest thing on the body of a man, and that is his circumcision. And it's really, really, really an incredibly beautiful thing to have that time to make sure that everything is set. And this whole parsha is about taking Yaakov's life, which was a great life, but a life of great trouble, many, many, many difficulties, really tough, until he came to live in Egypt, of all places, with his son being the viceroy, being the king of Egypt. And here in this moment, he says to him, if I have now found favor in your eyes, please place your hand beneath my thigh and swear an oath that you will do for me true kindness. Please don't let me be buried in Egypt. Let me lie with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their graves. And Yosef, of course, says, I will do as you say. And Yaakov says, swear to me. And he swore to him. It wasn't that he's not going to take Yosef's word, but he also knew that when it actually came to taking him, Yosef needed to go to the Pharaoh, and he needed to ask him to give permission to leave Egypt and go bury his father in Canaan at the Machpelah in Hebron. Okay, And he knew that the only way was going to be that he swore. And he would never, the Pharaoh would never say no to Yaakov, to Yosef, who swore. Very, very important that the swearing, and it happens many times in the Torah, that the vow, the swearing, is being made very, very prominent, because in actuality, we are not allowed to swear. So at this stage of the game, he realizes he's going to die, so he's going to take Ephraim and Menashe, the two sons of Yosef, which he is taking into the tribes of Yaakov. And he's going to say, I am going to take your sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt, and I will count them as mine to receive a share of the land of Israel. Ephraim and Menashe will be mine like Reuben and Shimon. In other words, as though they were born to me. But if you, meaning Yosef, have more children after them, they will be counted as your own and as separate tribes. Regarding their inheritance, they will not be tribes unto themselves, but rather classified by their brothers' names. Very, very, very important, extremely important. But when you're about to die, and you have the time, and you have the privilege that Yaakov had, then you can say things and take care of things that maybe during your lifetime you couldn't say, and maybe it wasn't the time. And now it is. So he says, I know that you are angry with me because when I was coming from Padan and Rachel, Yosef's mother, died on me while traveling through the land of Canaan, when there was about a half a mile stretch of land to reach Ephrat, which is Canaan. And you're upset that I buried her here on the way to Ephrat. And I didn't take her all the way. And I buried her instead at Bethlehem, but you should know that that was not my decision, but it was the decision of Hashem to bury her there. Why? Because in his prophetic state, he knew that Nebuchadnezzar, when he destroyed the first temple, would exile the children of Israel, and they would have to pass at the crossroads, and they would pass the tomb of Rachel, and Rachel would cry for her children, and the cries of Rachel would arrive at Hashem's throne and bring the children back and help them during exile. It's extremely, 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 extremely powerful. And in Likutei Sichot, volume 30, page 239-240, it's written, Rachel lost her own spiritual luxury, being buried in Eretz Yisrael is considered a spiritual luxury. The privilege of being buried, not only in Israel, but in the cave of the Machpelah with all the other Avim, in order to help her children. This represents the unparalleled quality of the Jewish mother, who is always willing to sacrifice for her own needs, spiritual or physical, for the sake of helping her children. And in this inner reason why Jewish identity follows the maternal and not the paternal. For even though the father possesses a greater degree of spirituality, since he has the privilege of observing more mitzvahs, more good deeds than a woman, the quality of a Jewish mother is nevertheless greater, that she is willing to forego much of that spirituality in order to be able to raise a family with tender and loving care. And since this quality is even more quintessentially Jewish than the spirituality of a man, it is the mother that actually makes the children Jewish. I can't help but think about so many Jewish mothers, me included, who have born children into this world and whose children have no connection to Judaism. Not in their lifetime and not when they're not alive. Extremely, extremely difficult to get this when you don't have the time anymore to change things. Difficult, impossible to get when you realize that the things that you didn't do and the things that you didn't teach and the things that you didn't make happen at a certain time can't be undone. And that's when you realize what you've lost, and that you can never, ever make up again. So then you look at your life and you realize that there must be other things that you must do in order to be a mother. And one of the things that I felt that I must do in order to be the mother is to teach. So here is an incredible moment when Yaakov blesses Ephraim and Menashe, and divine presence leave him for a moment, and he says, who are these children? He knows them for 17 years. Okay. Who are these children? Where do they come from? Because he can't see anymore. He's completely blind. And Torah says, Israel's eyes had become heavy with age, and he could not see. So Yosef brought the boys near to him, and he kissed them, and he hugged them. Israel said to Yosef, I didn't even expect to see your face. And look, God has shown me your children too. This brings us right back to the beginning, and he lived. Why? Because he saw his children. He saw his grandchildren. He saw great-grandchildren, and he saw that they all remained attached to Torah and mitzvahs. After Yaakov blessed the boys, and here comes a really, really important conversation, because he blesses not the firstborn Menashe first, but he blesses Ephraim first. And he blesses Ephraim because he realizes in his prophetic vision, of course, that from Ephraim will come greatness, and from Menashe will come that which is not the best. Let's say it that way. Menashe was the firstborn because, first of all, a Jew needs to feel out of place in exile to ensure that he does not assimilate. Menashe and Ephraim thus represent the two different reactions a Jew has to being in exile. On the one hand, he longs to leave exile and return to his father's home. But on the other hand, since he finds himself by divine providence in exile, he realizes that there has to be, and there is, a mission to be carried out, that he must toil and he must succeed. There is a reason for Jews being in exile. And there is a reason for Jews being in Eretz Israel. And Hashem shows us every single day of our lives, in reality, what you need to be doing in order to do His work. Even if you are in exile, you're not exempt from Torah and mitzvahs. You're not exempt from having Hashem's name on your lips every moment of every day. You're not exempt from keeping Shabbos. You're not exempt from needing and must have, desiring, first of all, to be in Eretz Israel, but to be connected to Hashem so you will be alive, as we said in the first conversation of the Rebbe. When Yosef saw that his father, Torah, was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he became upset. So he lifted up his father's hand, removing it from Ephraim's head. It's Torah, exactly, word for word, in order to place it on Menashe's head, because Menashe was the firstborn. Yosef said to his father, "Father, that is not right. This one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused. And he said, "I know, my son, that he is the firstborn. I know. He too will father a nation, and he too will be great. But his younger brother will be greater than him, and his children's fame will spread throughout the nations." And he said, he blessed them, and on this day he said, "The children of Israel will always bless their children with your names, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Menashe." He placed Ephraim before Menashe in his blessings to indicate that he would take precedence in the order of the tribes. And so it is written, and so it will be, and so it is. Israel said to Yaakov, "Look, I'm going to die. God will be with you, and he will bring you back to the land of your fathers. Since you are taking the trouble to bury me, I have given you one portion more than your brothers. I've given you the city of Shechem." You remember Shechem? Shechem is the place where Shimon and Levi made all the men be circumcised because the prince Shechem violated their sister Dinah, which I took from the hands of the Amorites with my sword and with my bow, when they waged war against us after Shimon and Levi killed the people of Shechem in revenge for the affair with Dinah. You know, everything has a place. Everything has a reason. Everything in Torah makes perfect sense. There is never a question of why is that the way it is, because Torah comes immediately and gives you the answer. I've said it many times and I'll say it again, there is not a thing that you can look for in life and not find an appropriate answer in Torah. So now Yaakov calls for his sons and says, gather round and I will tell you what will happen at the end of days. But Yaakov found himself unable to reveal the time when Mashiach would come, so he changed the subject. What happened there? The divine presence left him because Hashem did not want him to reveal to the tribes when Mashiach will come. And there are many, 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 many questions about why that is. And there is a very interesting, really an interesting thing that Rashi did not write the details of the end of days departed from Yaakov, for he was fully aware of them the whole time. Rather, it is only that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, has the ability to inspire him and all of us. And she departed. 'Twasn't the time. 'Twasn't the time. And here we go into a father who for 147 years lives, knows his sons, knows every single solitary trait, not only as human beings, but also, of course, divinely inspired. And he tells each one of his sons who he is, what he is, what will become of him, what is his greatness and what is his limitation, and why he has what he has and why he lost what he has, and why, for instance, Reuven lost his right of firstborn because he moved the bed of his father where the divine presence rested, and instead the rights of the firstborn were given to Yosef. A completely different ballgame. But Hashem decides. And in this case, Yaakov, our patriarch, the perfection of the patriarchs, sets up the rest of the Jewish nation's existence. In every single word he says to his sons at the time before his death. Obviously, I am not going to go into the attributes of his 12 sons, but I would really suggest that you take the time to read and to understand, because it totally explains the next 5,000 years. Certainly explains what happens immediately after Yaakov dies and after Yosef dies. So we are at the point where Yaakov has blessed all of his sons. We have Yosef as an upper tzaddik. We have Benjamin as a lower tzaddik. Two perfectly righteous individuals. And incredible generations of Jews, of Hebrews, of Israelites come out of 12 tribes living in Goshen, living in Egypt, living in exile, very safely tucked away in Goshen with yeshivas and study houses and their own customs and their own dress, and basically a little land where they expand and grow. And we arrive at the death of Yaakov. He instructed them, saying, I will soon die, and my soul will be gathered in with the souls of my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave which is in Ephron the Hittite's field, in the cave that's in the field of the Machpelah, facing Mamre in the land of Canaan, the field which Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite as a burying plot. They buried Abraham and his wife Sarah there, and they buried Yitzchak and his wife Rivka there, and I buried Leah there. And the purchase of the field and its cave from the sons of Ches still stands. Look how perfectly set up. That's where I'm going. That's where I want to be. This was paid for, and I'm going with my family. Incredible. There is no question whether or not Hebron and the Machpelah belongs to the people of Israel. And Yaakov finished commanding his sons. He gathered his legs into his bed, breathed his last, and his soul was gathered to be with the souls of his people. God is unlimited. The world is limited. And the Torah is the interface between them. For the Torah deals with the worldly matters, and yet it remains the undiluted wisdom of Hashem. The Torah says, I will show you how to carry out God's infinite will in the world's limited terms. But why must the Torah bend to the world? Why can the Torah not override the world if it gets in the way? This could be one of two possible reasons. The world will not allow it, or the Torah does not wish to override the world, because the Torah wishes all its activities to be at peace with God's creation. Likutei Sichot, volume number 35, page 223. So, of course, now comes the process of Yaakov's burial. Has to be embalmed, has to be carried by the tribes. There has to be permission granted by the Pharaoh to Yosef to carry his father. And because of the vow that Yosef made, Pharaoh allows him to travel and take with him a great number of dignitaries, Egyptians who loved Yaakov and who mourned for him for 40 days. Because it takes 40 days to embalm, so for 40 days he was mourned. Then our time of mourning is 7 days. And when Yaakov arrives at Goen Ha'atad, he calls for, on the other side of the Jordan already, he calls for 7 days. He eulogizes his father and he designates a mourning of 7 days. That is the actual Shiv'ah, the actual 7 days that we are in mourning after someone dies. In the Jewish religion, you sit very close to the ground for 7 days, and the mourning is extremely intense. When the Canaanites, already on that side, the local inhabitants saw the mourning at Goren Ha'atad, they said, this is an immense mourning for the Egyptians. Therefore, they named the place, which is on the other side of the Jordan, Avel Mitzrayim, the mourning of Egypt, mourning as mourning for a death. Yaakov's sons did exactly as he instructed them, not allowing any Egyptian or even one of Yaakov's grandsons to carry him. His sons carried him to the land of Canaan, and they buried him in the Machpelah, facing Mamre, the field which Abraham had bought for a burial plot from Ephron the Hittite. Keeps mentioning this because Torah knows and Torah knew for certain that there would be a time when this would be disputed. After he had buried his father, Yosef returns to Egypt. Both he, his brothers, and all those who had gone with him to bury his father. And here comes a very interesting interlude. Yaakov is no more. The brothers see a change for the worse in Yosef's conduct after their father had died. And they said, maybe Yosef will start, I'm reading Torah, maybe Yosef will start to hate us and pay us back for all the bad things that we did to him. We're talking about 17 years after they came to live in Goshen. 17 years after Yosef takes care of them, gives them, supports them. So they fabricated a plan and instructed messengers to go to Yosef to say, please will you now forgive the wrongdoing of your brothers and their sin, that they have done evil things to you. So please will you now forgive the wrongdoing of the servants of the God of your father, for even though your father is dead, his God is alive. And when the messengers spoke to Yosef, he cried. In addition to sending messengers to his brothers went to Yosef. And they fell down in front of him and said, look, we are your slaves. And Yosef said to them, don't be afraid, for God only desires good for you. Am I instead of God? Says Yosef. You planned to do bad things to me, but God had already intended that what you did to me should happen for good reasons, in order to make things like they are today, where I am keeping a great number of people alive. So don't be afraid now. I will provide for you and your children And Yosef, continued to comfort them and spoke to them words of encouragement. When you have a bad conscience, when you know that you've done things that weren't right, and when you know that you've done things that had negative effects on people in your life, and who hasn't, you have a choice. You can harp on that and continue to do bad things in your life, or you can change your life and decide that you're going to do Torah and mitzvahs. That is the conversation of every moment of every day that you do tshuva. Yosef lived in Egypt, both he and his father's household, and he lived 110 years. Yosef saw children and a third generation born to Ephraim. The sons of Machir, Menashe's son, were born, and Yosef raised them on his knee. Yosef said to his brothers, I am going to die soon. God will surely remember you and take you out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yosef made the children of Israel swear, his brothers, saying, God will surely remember you, and you should then take my bones out of here. Yosef died at the age of 110 years. They embalmed him, and they placed his coffin into the Nile in Egypt. Why into the Nile? Because the Egyptians believed that because Yosef was such an incredibly holy and incredibly bountiful human being, that because of his his greatness, more than anything else, his greatness, he will bring that greatness and that power that he had and that bounty that he had to the Nile. And since the Nile is the god of Egypt, and since Egypt depends on the Nile for fertilizing the country, they figured if they put the coffin into the Nile, that would be a blessing. Here is a good question. How were the Jewish people able to withstand? How were the Jewish people able to withstand the harsh Egyptian exile, which continues? Answers the Torah, because of Yosef was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Yosef, the dear leader of the Jewish people, who he had sustained and supported in many times, and during the famine had not deserted them. He did not choose to spend the afterlife in a holy place where he would personally enjoy the radiance of the greater degree of the divine presence. No, even after his passing, Joseph wanted to be physically close with his people, when even if it meant being buried in Egypt until the day when God will surely remember you, and then you should take my bones out of here. And that happened, and they brought the bones of Yosef to Shechem, which was the second portion of the blessing of Yaakov. And in Shechem, until today, we have the tomb of Yosef HaTzadik. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. Be strong, and may we be strengthened. The end of the first book of Moses. From the beginning of time, Bereshit, until this moment, this is the conclusion of a time from the beginning until the moment of, again, the beginning of a new era in the time of the lives of the Hebrew people. From this moment on, nothing will ever be the same. Nothing will ever bring us again Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, our patriarchs. But everything that we need and everything that we have to have from the moment of Yosef's passing and Yaakov's passing is written clearly until that moment and until the end of the fifth book, which is really the beginning of the beginning again, because this is how a Jew lives. A Jew lives from the beginning to the beginning. And we're always in the same cycle because Hashem is always guiding our lives. Torah is always guiding our lives. And 613 commandments, which are the gift of Hashem to the Jewish people, never change. They're always there for us to come to to ask for, to hold on to. Etz Chaim Hi, the tree of life, is Torah. We finished the first book, Chazak, Chazak, V'nitchazek, and may Hashem bless and Hashem give peace and quiet to the world, to His people, to the nations, to each and every one of us. And I'm so happy to finally be able to say that my academy launched the first national competition of poetry and thought of the Shoah, of the Holocaust in Italy. And that is going to be a big competition of poetry, and it's something that really brings together something that I swore in 1992 at the mass grave of Babi Yar in Kiev. And I promised that I would be a voice for all those who Hashem took. And that's what we are as Jewish people in the world. We need to be lamplighters, and we need to remember that that is our mission in the world, no matter where in the world we are. Hashem Yivarech, Hashem bless each and every one. Shalom. Peace.